So, over the past couple of months, I've been trying to figure out the best way to make videos that recap the decade without me turning into a countdown channel. Now, no knock to none of the creators who make those type of videos, but personally, I just find that type of editing very monotonous and it's extremely repetitive, and I just don't enjoy making those type of videos whatsoever. So after several days of thinking, I finally came to the conclusion of what if I tried to figure out who was the worst drafting team of the decade. Now, after doing my research, I concluded with two teams. But I decided to go with the Sacramento Kings, as you clearly can tell in the title and in the thumbnail, because Sacramento, even though yes, they do have some solid draft picks in DeMarcus Cousins, De'Aaron Fox, and even two really great steals in Hassan Whiteside and Isaiah Thomas in the second round, they swung and missed so hard that one can argue many of their top 10 picks were not even NBA caliber players. Let me explain. So the decade begins with the 2009 draft, in which the Sacramento Kings have 3 draft picks, 2 of which are first rounders, and I'm not going to talk about the second round pick because they traded him on draft night and really didn't receive anything in return. And then when it comes to the second first round pick, the Sacramento Kings selected Omer Caspi with the 23rd overall pick. And even though Caspi is no longer in the league, he actually had a pretty solid career for someone who selected 23rd overall. But more importantly, and what's problematic, is with the 4th overall pick, the Sacramento Kings selected Tyreke Evans. Now, in the beginning of Tyreke's career, this wasn't problematic whatsoever because by the end of his rookie campaign, Tyreke performed so well that he actually won the Rookie of the Year award. However, after his rookie season is when we started to see a noticeable decline because, as many of us are aware, Tyreke Evans peaked during his rookie season. For the next 3 years as a Sacramento King, Tyreke Evans' productivity started to drop, in large part to do with injuries, as well as potentially the Sacramento Kings never really giving him an identifiable role. But after the 2013 season, he was eventually traded to the New Orleans Pelicans, and he continued to struggle. And after 4 years in New Orleans, he was traded back to Sacramento, in which his comeback in Sacktown was short-lived. And then after that, he actually had a really good season in Memphis that was so promising that the Indiana Pacers decided to pick him up. But in Indiana, he was terrible. And actually, he performed so poorly that allegedly he started to abuse illegal substance, which has now led him to be banned out of the league. And if you look at some of the players who were selected after Tyreke Evans, both Steph Curry and DeMar DeRozan were still available and would have worked out fine for the Sacramento Kings. Now I'm going to skip over the 2010 draft class because the Kings actually did really well in that draft by selecting both DeMarcus Cousins and Hassan Whiteside, so there's no real need for me to go into detail about what happened there. However, in 2011 is where things turned for the worse. So in the 2011 draft class, the Sacramento Kings have 3 draft picks, 2 of which are second rounders, one of which was actually used to select Isaiah Thomas, so that's a massive plus for the Kings. However, the other second rounder was used to select Tyler Honeycutt, who only played 24 games in the NBA, and granted, it is a second round pick, so it is fairly hit or miss. But having the 5th pick in the second round and selecting a player who only played 24 games in the league, to me, is still a miss, but it's nowhere near as big as a miss as the 7th overall pick that the Sacramento Kings had this year. And with the 7th overall pick, the Sacramento Kings decided to select Bismack Biyombo, who they traded immediately to the Charlotte Bobcats, which was part of a 3-team trade, and in return, the Sacramento Kings received John Salmons and Jimmer Fredette, with Jimmer Fredette being the young prospect that they received in return. After an electrifying senior season at BYU, Jimmer Fredette was starting to captivate a lot of interest with his entertaining shot selection from deep as well as his stat line, as he was nearly averaging 30 points per game. But unfortunately for Sacramento, none of that translated to the pros. Matter of fact, Jimmer performed so poorly in his first 2.5 years in the NBA that the Sacramento Kings couldn't even find a suitable trade option for him and had no other choice but to waive him. He was eventually picked up by the Chicago Bulls for the remainder of the season. Then after Chicago, he played for New Orleans, then signed with the San Antonio Spurs, but the Spurs waived him before he even made his debut. Then signed back with the Pelicans, but then was waived by the Pelicans 9 days later. Then signed with the Knicks, only played 2 games, and was out of the league by the age of 27. Now, I know for a fact that some people are going to make the argument that he tried to make his NBA comeback last season, but I don't really know if I would consider that a comeback when it was only 6 games playing for the Phoenix Suns at the end of the year, and even then the Suns decided not to bring him back either. And with Jimmer Fredette out of the league within his first 5 years in the NBA, the Sacramento Kings quite frankly could have drafted anyone else at the 7th overall pick besides trading down for Jimmer Fredette. But to be a bit more specific, if they wanted a guard, they easily could have selected Kemba Walker, who was selected 9th overall, or Klay Thompson, who was selected 11th overall. And even if you want to go down a little bit further, they could have also drafted Kawhi Leonard, who was selected 15th overall. In 2012, the Sacramento Kings had 2 draft picks, one of which was a second rounder but was traded on draft night, so we're not going to concern ourselves with that pick. However, the other one was the 5th overall pick, and with that selection, the Sacramento Kings decided to go with Thomas Robinson. Thomas Robinson was coming off of a pretty solid junior year in college and decided to take his talents to the NBA, but very similar to Jimmer Fredette. Unfortunately, none of those talents actually translated to the pros, and after 51 games in his rookie season, he was traded to the Houston Rockets. After Houston, he was traded to the Portland Trail Blazers, then from Portland to Denver, but then Denver waived him. However, the Philadelphia 76ers tried to swing at him and claimed him off his waivers, but that didn't last too long either. Then after that, he played for the Brooklyn Nets, then finally the Los Angeles Lakers, and at the end of the 2017 season, at the age of 26 years old, Thomas Robinson was already out of the league. And very similar to the Jimmer Fredette situation, because Robinson was out of the league so early on, quite frankly, the Sacramento Kings could have selected practically anybody else and they would have had a better selection than Thomas Robinson. But to be a bit more realistic, because it seems as if the Kings wanted to beef up their front court, Harrison Barnes, Terrence Ross, Andre Drummond, and Myers Leonard were all still available after the Thomas Robinson selection. Now in 2013, the Sacramento Kings did a bit better than the prior 2 draft classes, but still failed miserably as they had another top 10 draft pick. Now this year, the Sacramento Kings had 2 draft picks, one of which was a second rounder, and with that second round pick, they decided to go with Ray McCallum. Ray McCallum really wasn't that great of a selection for a second rounder. However, looking at the players selected after him, quite frankly, that might have actually been the best selection that they had available, so I'll give him a pass on that second round pick. However, I can't really give him a pass for the 7th overall pick, and with that selection, they decided to go with Ben Mclemore. Ben Mclemore was a 6'3" guard who was coming out of Kansas, who showed the ability to space the floor out and was pretty athletic for somebody at his size. So it seemed as if he was going to fit well for the Kings, in which they desperately needed to fill out that guard position since Tyreke Evans and Jimmer Fredette failed miserably for the team. However, Ben Mclemore was not the answer. Unfortunately, after 4 years, the Kings decided to go in a different direction, which led Ben Mclemore to sign with the Memphis Grizzlies. But in Memphis, just like in Sacramento, success was very scarce. So after 1 year as a Grizzly, Mclemore was traded back to Sacramento, and after playing only 19 games, the Sacramento Kings decided to waive him. Now, luckily for Ben Mclemore, he was able to find a job playing for the Houston Rockets, and thanks to an injury that Eric Gordon has sustained early on this year, Mclemore has started to receive some quality rotation minutes. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Ben Mclemore moving forward will stay in the NBA, because quite frankly, as of right now, it just seems as if Mclemore is just taking advantage of an opportunity that more likely won't be there by the end of the season once Eric Gordon comes back. But until then, we can at least say the Kings did draft someone who is still in the league. But if you go back and you look in the 2013 draft and look at the players who were selected after Mclemore, you have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and then you also have CJ McCollum, who too is another shooting guard who can space the floor out as well and is a bit more dynamic because of his ability to create his own shot, unlike Ben Mclemore. Now, the selection that the Sacramento Kings made in the 2014 draft class is easily one of the biggest draft fails throughout the entire decade. So at the time, Pete D'Alessandro was the general manager for the Sacramento Kings, and he had this brilliant idea to think outside of the box and bring some outsiders into the front office. Now, obviously, these outsiders are heavily based in analytics, but after they looked at the numbers and looked at some footage, even the analytic outsiders heavily suggested to draft Elfrid Payton over Nik Stauskas.
So why do you rate Payton over Stauskas?
Defensively is where I think the Kings could really improve next season. So I think Payton is a better defender and would be a much better fit in terms of improving on the defensive end of the ball.
Now, Elfrid Payton isn't an all-star, let alone some MVP caliber player, but he would have been better than who the Sacramento Kings selected, and with the 8th overall pick, completely disregarding the outside help that Pete D'Alessandro decided to bring in himself, the Sacramento Kings selected Nik Stauskas. Now, this is one of those selections that everyone knew was a terrible mistake when it happened live, because Nik Stauskas is a 2 guard who can shoot threes and had some potential to create his own shot. The The problem with this though is that literally just last year, the Sacramento Kings drafted Ben Mclemore, who too is a shooting guard who shoots threes and had the potential of creating his own shot. What makes it even crazier is that when Nik Stauskas was being drafted, it was already understood that Ben Mclemore had a higher ceiling thanks to his athleticism. But wait, it gets worse. After playing just 1 year with the Sacramento Kings, Nik Stauskas played for the Philadelphia 76ers, then the Brooklyn Nets, then the Portland Trail Blazers, and finally his last stop was in Cleveland, and at the age of 25 years old, Nik Stauskas was out of the league.
Right on. Yeah. I mean, very, very good.
Either that or we're all wrong. Yeah, we'll know that in 2 years.
Get it? Get the joke? Because we're incompetent. Man, I couldn't write that even if I tried. But wait, it gets worse. If the Sacramento Kings truly wanted another shooting guard, which doesn't make any sense to me to why they would want to select another 2 guard, Zach LaVine was selected 13th overall by the Minnesota Timberwolves. However, in my honest opinion, the Sacramento Kings should have been looking for a power forward, and if they were, Dario Saric would have been their best option as he was still available. Now fast forward to the 2015 draft, and you guessed it, the Sacramento Kings have another top 10 pick. Quite frankly, it should be against some type of rule for a team to have this many top 10 picks, especially consecutively, but hey, who am I, right? So with the 6th overall pick, the Sacramento Kings selected Willie Cauley-Stein Jr. And very similar to the whole Nik Stauskas situation, everyone knew when this was happening live that this was going to be very problematic since, you know, the Sacramento Kings already had DeMarcus Cousins on their roster. So why are you drafting another center? Now, Willie Cauley-Stein Jr. is still in the league, so kudos to him. However, he's hanging on by a very, very thin thread, so I don't necessarily know how long his NBA career is going to last. Now, going back and looking at the 2015 draft class, if the Sacramento Kings just wanted another big man, they easily could have selected Miles Turner as he was still available, but also Justice Winslow would have been a solid complementary piece to a team that had an aging Rudy Gay on the perimeter. Up next, we have the 2016 draft, and you guessed it, yet again, the Sacramento Kings have another top 10 pick. This time they decided to actually go for a power forward and selected Marquise Chris, however decided to trade him on draft night to the Phoenix Suns. In return, they did receive Bogdan Bogdanovic, so to their credit, that's a pretty good player for a top 8 pick. And also they received Skal Labissière and Papagiannis. Skal, very similar to Willie Cauley-Stein Jr., is hanging on by a thin thread in the NBA, and I highly doubt he will be in the league past the 2023 season. And then when it comes to Papagiannis, you guessed it, he is no longer in the league. Nevertheless though, if the Sacramento Kings just wanted a power forward, Domantas Sabonis was still available, and even if we start to look beyond just the 8th overall pick and look at the 13th pick in which Papagiannis was selected and then the 28th pick in which Skal Labissière was selected, you saw players such as Pascal Siakam, DeJounte Murray, Caris LeVert, Malik Beasley, and even Malcolm Brogdon, who was selected in the 2nd round. Now in the 2017 draft class, the Sacramento Kings have 3 picks, 2 of which are first rounders. Both of those first rounders are, you guessed it, top 10 picks. Now with their 2nd round pick, they selected Frank Mason, and he's now playing for the Milwaukee Bucks, so we don't necessarily know how well that draft pick will turn out, so we'll pause on that. However, with the 5th overall pick, we have a pretty good understanding that De'Aaron Fox will turn out to be a pretty solid starting caliber point guard in this league, and hopefully he will one day become an all-star, and who knows, maybe even all-NBA performer. But then we have the 10th overall pick, and with that selection, the Sacramento Kings decided to go with Zach Collins, but they decided to trade him, and in return, they received Harry Giles and Justin Jackson. 2 players who at best are okay, but definitely aren't worth a top 10 pick. But then when you go back and look at the 2017 draft class and see who was still available after the 10th selection, you still have players such as Luke Kennard, Bam Adebayo, and Donovan Mitchell. And then even if you want to do a little bit more further digging and look at who was selected after Justin Jackson and Harry Giles, you still have Terrence Ferguson, Jared Allen, OG Anunoby, Kyle Kuzma. I think you kind of get the gist here. And then finally, we have the 2018 draft class, and with the 2nd overall pick, the Sacramento Kings decided to go with Marvin Bagley. Now at this point, I do believe it's a bit unfair to harshly criticize the Sacramento Kings for not selecting Luka Doncic. However, even if we were to just look at power forwards, as of right now, I do believe it is safe to say that Jaren Jackson Jr. still would have been a better pick than Marvin Bagley. But even with Bagley aside, as you can clearly tell, the Sacramento Kings have wasted a lot of top 10 picks. Just to give you a wrap up, throughout the decade, the Kings had 21 picks. 12 of those picks were first rounders, and 11 out of those 12 first rounders were top 10 picks. And out of those top 10 picks, outside of De'Aaron Fox and DeMarcus Cousins, the only other player that I can be optimistic about is Marvin Bagley. However, everyone else is either A, out of the league, most of them were out of the league by their mid-20s, or B, rotation players at best who are receiving somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes, but realistically speaking can be out of the league within the next 2 or 3 years as well. So for a team to have that many top 10 picks, to waste them year in and year out, in my opinion, is not only unacceptable, but gives me the right to label them as the worst drafting team in the decade. So with all that being said, people, please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. If you want me to make that other video about that other team, like I said before, get this video to around like 50 or 60 likes. I don't even remember what I said, but just like the video and let me know in the comment section below. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.